in our bodies, we've almost got 3 larders, I call them, 3 fridges, big deep fridges and larders. The first one is sugar, and we store sugar in the form of glycogen. They're like little Mars bars stored to be utilized when you need them. And because the brain's efficient or lazy, it likes that because it's quick energy. So we have this big larder of glycogen, and then there's a second larder which very few people are aware of. It's called protein debris. As we're speaking now, 100,000 skin cells have just regenerated on your body. The old skin cells haven't all gone. They are bits of protein, and we call it debris, that have gone and found storage spaces in all your cells. And that's not an accident. That's the body from your primordial instinct saying, one day you're not going to eat and you're going to need protein. So these little life packs we're going to keep stored there.
So they've been displaced or sort of discarded,
yes.
But actually they're quite useful?
Yes, okay. Correct. Now
scraps or something.
Scraps, yeah,
scraps.
Yeah. So these are dead and dying DNA repair stuff, but it's protein. And this is now being stored in your second larder. And then you have a third larder called fat. Now, the fat is the bit that everyone's interested in losing weight, etc. But in order of preference, the body will always go towards the sugar larder. Now, a lot of people...
Because we all fancy a Mars bar.
We all fancy a Mars bar or carbohydrate, a croissant, chocolate, biscuits, all of the carbs. But it's not just about what we put in our mouth. We talked about stress. We talked about the adrenal gland. You can make sugar within you in the right environment. So if you're constantly stressed, your cortisol levels will demand the making of sugar. Now, of course, that sugar you're always utilizing. So it will go into the glycogen storage and some of it will go into the fat larder. So these guys who are stressed are constantly building this larder up, and the other larders are just left redundant. Now, what I mean by detoxification, and this is the interesting, Professor Usimi, who won the Nobel Prize in 2016, discovered that if we emptied this protein debris out, in other words, we got the body to biohack this debris and remove it, the body works quicker, more efficiently, it metabolizes better, you get more mitochondrial energy, and effectively your capability to regenerate increases to such a level that you can anti-age, you can reduce the acceleration of aging and even reverse it. So how do you get to this larder? Well, you've got this big fridge full of sugar first, and you're not going to be able to get to the second larder until you empty the sugar out. So we do various versions of fasting. Now, intermittent fasting has been very popular, but ultimately the bottom line is to get to the other larders, you've got to empty the sugar out. Once you empty the sugar out, you're effectively taking a whole load of ammunition out of your system. So when the cortisol comes up under stress, it doesn't have all this ammunition to work with anymore. Your pancreas stops making as much insulin. So your inflammatory markers just drop. And in our data...
What's an inflammatory marker?
So effectively, inflammation is it's a form of heat that's produced in the body that can impact on every cell. And with that, it creates dysfunction in the cell. So inflammatory markers are found to reduce when you have less sugar in the system.
So it's a good indicator.
Good indicator, yeah.
Right.
And so emptying this larder out, we do aggressive fasting, medically supervised, and it doesn't take long. 2 or 3 days, you can empty that sugar larder out. If you've got more Mars bars than your colleagues, it may take another day or 2. But ultimately, that sugar is removed. People worry, oh my gosh, I'm going to have problems with energy. I won't be able to survive. The reality is these are storage tanks. They're a bit like your fridge. The problem is we keep filling the front of the fridge and never looking at the back of the fridge. And you wouldn't do that with your own fridge. So emptying the first larder out then pushes the body and forces it to go towards that protein debris. So your brain will command the body, go and find protein. And it empties out from the brain, the heart, the gastric system. Everywhere there's debris will be taken out, recycled to brand new DNA. So you're effectively lifting away all the rubbish in your body that's slowing your body down. Most of our patients who've done this, and there's been a few hundred now, said that they sleep better, they feel alert, they feel less stressed, they just feel a calmness which they could never describe before. Once that debris is over and the sugar's reduced, there's only one place to go. That's the fat larder. So the body starts biohacking its internal fat. And we can measure this by measuring the ketones in your body. So when you metabolize fat, you release ketones, and we can measure this. Now, your brain is fat. So when you start biohacking fat, your brain gets fed first. And when your brain's fed first, you get satiety. So it regulates your hunger, your craving, and everything. Now, once people have got into that lane, they don't crave anymore. They don't comfort eat anymore. They feel an energy which they love. They sleep well. And so essentially that detoxification is a way of getting rid of all the rubbish in your system. And we always insist on doing some form of detox before we go into the repair mode.
And the detox, we'll come back to this great list, this menu of yours. The detox is triggered by a fast.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, correct.
And what you're effectively doing, whether it's a short fast or a long one, and the longer one, the couple of days or whatever you said would be more effective. But effectively, that one thing then triggers off all these other functions, which your body knows. It actually knows how to do it.
Absolutely. It's in fact, not only does it know how to do it, it is what it's built for.
Right.
So having done this, now remember, your predecessors didn't have a choice. There would be days, 2-3 days, where they wouldn't have food. So, and they've survived for hundreds of thousands of years. So we are built for this. But what we've done is fill these larders up and have increased these inflammatory processes that lead to disease disorders and these abnormal signals. Once you start biohacking the fat, not only will you lose weight and feel better, the energy that your body gets used to being in that lane. And when you do eat something bad or something that's not so good for you, your body protests quicker. You'll feel bloated. You'll feel windy. You won't sleep well at night. And it's almost like you'll basically train the body to be on your side, which is why healthy people stay healthier. Because when they don't eat something that is good for them, the body protests. When you're ill, those radars are subdued. And so it's a way of sensitizing your body. That's not the only detox. The second detox, which is something we don't realize, is living in an urban life. We're constantly inhaling heavy metals, things like aluminium, lead, and in the past mercury. These heavy metals have half-lives of up to 30 years. In other words, 50% will leave after 30 years. And these slow down your processes. So not only do we detox in terms of getting rid of the inflammatory markers, we like to help people detox from these heavy metals and toxins.
And how do we do that?
Well, there's natural nutrients like chlorella or spirulina. And in the more excessive cases, there are some EDTA drips that can sponge out these heavy metals in a supervised way.
And can we avoid them by not eating things or not exposing it? I mean,
you can try and mitigate your risk, but the point about living in cities, it's all around us. So hence what we have to do is accept what is around us and try and mitigate against the risk. Ideally, we should be living in a nice open environment with the sea or the jungle or fresh air, but we have to be realistic and once we understand what's going on, we can start to mitigate against risks.
See, what's interesting about this conversation is we've touched on a few things so far that I can actually do, and we're going to get a lot more. But the very process of hearing you talk about this sometimes quite technical set of interrelated subjects, for me, makes me want to be curious about what I can do about it.
Yes.
I find listening to you speak, it wakes me up. It wakes up my hunger for knowledge because I feel like I can actually do something about it by listening to what you're saying. And I haven't, the key. I haven't got to the point of saying, okay, here's the 5 things I can do yet. But actually, before that's happened, I feel like I want to know. That's going to make me curious and go and read and listen in a way that I wasn't before.
Yes, and you own it. And I think this is the thing. We are humans. We're built to survive. Our intuition tells us what is right and what is wrong. We just need to empower ourselves a little bit, have the confidence. And it's very difficult because we have a lot of experts around us telling us about the right pathway. Fundamentally, like you said, short or long fast, as long as people understand what they're doing, they can bespoke it to their lifestyles. The end point will be reached at different variation times, and depending on how much emphasis the detox has, will determine what you do. The reparative stage is very interesting. Now, the reparative stage, is about feeding that dynamo, the battery, the mitochondria. There are certain nutrients which will help support the battery feed it. Now, of course, if your battery's got full energy, you'll be able to do more. Your cells will be able to regenerate. You'll have more cellular function. you'll feel good, and it's self-fulfilling. The better you feel, the more you do, and you more or less the body looks after itself. So there's ways of improving mitochondrial activity. There's sophisticated drips as well as nutritional supplements. And the other thing we mustn't forget is hormones. Now, hormones have always been associated with menopause or andropause. Hormonal decline in an average person starts at the age of 30. We drop our hormones maybe by 1% per year. Now, the hormones are the highways. They're the highways along which everything travels. So when your hormones decline, it's like having potholes on the road. Things just don't work or fire as well. And 50, 60 years ago, we just accepted that this is aging. But the reality is, if we kept those highways open, why would we age? If we keep the cargo, the nutrition good, and the highways moving and protect against the toxins that I've described, why can't those cells carry on? And ultimately, evidence has shown that that is the case. So part of our repair is looking at hormonal restoration, mitochondrial restoration, and then things like sleep. We mustn't underestimate the power of sleep. It is when the body shuts down and goes into a reparative stage. And unfortunately, this cortisol gland, which is pumping out cortisol, should go to sleep by about 9 p.m. But sadly, because the world we live in, the artificial lights, the stresses, that cortisol sometimes wakes up at the wrong time. And then the melatonin hormone, which is anti-inflammatory and helps you sleep, doesn't come out to play because the mammoth of cortisol.
So melatonin, which I think most of us will have heard, or maybe not fully understood, melatonin is produced through the good process that you've described, which we often miss because the other bad one that's happening to us. This will help deal with inflammation.
100%.
Wow.
What is interesting is that there's a gland called the pineal gland in your brain.
Yeah.
And the pineal gland is the one gland that is associated with longevity.
Yeah.
And what does the pineal gland make? Melatonin. It produces melatonin in the day with a view to releasing at night.
So I don't want to simplify it to the ridiculous, but if people like me are going to actually do something about it, then it probably needs to be pretty basic. So if you sort of reduce all that down to one thing, however we achieve good sleep will release into our system the melatonin that's been produced during the day.
Correct.
And that melatonin during the night will deal with the inflammation.
Absolutely.
And we know, and you said it, inflammation is a big killer, and it's a big cause of aging.
Yes, and melatonin is just one hormone that's produced by good sleep. Okay. The other one is growth hormone.
So melatonin is a hormone.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yes, and it's made through darkness and sleep. There's a study done by a chap called Bill Lawrence in the US. You talk about, is there a different plan for young people versus older people? Not really. So Bill Lawrence, he's into peptides. Peptides are basically protein amino acids in different sequences that feed different parts of the body. So he did a study on 60-year-olds, and he gave one group the task of eating healthily and exercising, and he gave the second group eating healthy, exercising, and taking this peptide for the pineal gland and another gland called the thymus gland that protects your immune system. And basically, these were just oral supplements twice a year, and he followed them through for 15 years, and he measured their biological age. And how did he do that? He looked at telomere length. This is like the protective element of a DNA. And the longer your telomere, the more your DNA is protected. The shorter your telomere, the less it's protected, and you can age. So he measured telomeres. He then looked at what they call CD57 counts, which is your immune system. And he looked at something called DNA methylation, which is the toxicity around your DNA. And he did this yearly up until the age of 75. And when he looked at biological age in those who took the peptides, i.e. the pineal gland, which produces melatonin, this group on average was about 25% younger at the age of 75 than the group who didn't take peptides, which shows you the benefit of something like melatonin as a hormone and feeding that particular gland.
Well, I'll tell you something really funny, which I don't think I've mentioned to you yet. I go to a small island called Sifnos in Greece. And I was there a couple of months ago. I'd not been for a long time. And I walked down to a restaurant to book an evening meal. I hadn't been to that restaurant even longer, maybe up to 10 years. I got the restaurant. The same guy was there. We do what you do. We shook hands, said hello, said we're going to eat here tonight. It'd be lovely. And he said, what's going on? I said, this is absolutely true. I said, what do you mean what's going on? He said, you were here 10 years ago. So now you should be 10 years older. You're actually 10 years younger.
Yeah.
I want to know what's happening.
Yeah.
That's exactly what he said to me.
Yes. Well, there you are.
So something happened.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you mind if we go back to the beginning of your menu?
Yes.
And we'll see how much time we can devote to just summarize what this is and therefore some things that we can actually do about it.
Yes.
The list I've got, and then I'll go back to the beginning. We had toxins and the damage they do. Number 2 was cells that need food. We got the mitochondria, the cells, the battery, energy, and we've just touched on some things you can do. No doubt you'll tell us there's more very practical things, but you know we all know what sleep is. Now we know what happens when we sleep and how critical it is to our health. Then we had the immune system, and we talked about gut and inflammation. And then we talked about stress and this issue of having caveman brains, but living in a modern society for which we haven't yet had half a chance to actually get used to it.
Correct. So
we're filling our body with stress and it's got absolutely nowhere to go.
Yes.
Because there is no saber-toothed tiger to run from or kill. No. And something you said earlier as well is something about the brain. Oh, we are a slave to our brain.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's number 5. And number 6, which I think number 6 was the bundling issue, which may be slightly separate. So let's try and get one bit of advice for each of these if we can. So toxins, we take them into our body, they do damage.
Correct.
How can we, apart from the detox process you've been through, which I think is amazing and so ludicrously simple, doesn't mean taking 5 different pills, which is when you get older, what tends to happen. How can we either deal with the toxins we take in or take in less?
Yeah.
Toxins?
So quite simply, I think the key, if you're going to take 1 or 2 interventions to detoxify, it would be to reduce the amount of carbohydrate that we take in. Not easy because, bread, rice, potato, every culture has it. But if we can try and remove as much carbohydrate from our diet as we can, that would be a big step because over time that glycogen will remove and the inflammation will follow. Now, linked to that, we know that we can probably survive quite well with 2 meals a day instead of 3. So again, getting into a mindset of eating twice is important. Some things we need to remember that our body cannot differentiate the need for food, water, or minerals. So when we have those cravings for food, what I suggest is sometimes have a pint of water 30 minutes at that time or 30 minutes before a meal, and you'll find that your body didn't actually need the food. It just needed water and minerals. So simple things like that. Reduce the carb, go towards a 2 meal a day diet, and look at taking water in when you feel that hunger pang. That would be a good detox. In terms of heavy metal, all the testing we've done is majority of people have aluminium, lead and mercury to some extent in their system. So simple nutrients like chlorella or spirulina, which are available in good health food shops, will help mitigate the risk against the heavy metals. Some people can suffer quite a lot with mercury poisoning. They can feel depleted. It's almost misdiagnosed with myalgia or post-viral fatigue. So again, just manage the detox. And you can't change where we live, but we can mitigate against those risks. Those would be the fundamental principles that I would apply. And most importantly, try and eat whole food. Processed food is sometimes lacks the nutrition we require. So we're well fed but undernourished. And I think try and aim to eat less but better.
Yeah, I suppose junk food processed food slips into junk food quite easily, doesn't it, really?
Yes.
And what do you say? You're saying that is, apart from the poor carbohydrates, it's full of all sorts of other stuff, which our body doesn't really
Yes, and
need.
it's been preserved, it's been manipulated, and it's made for bulk. And we have to remember that, if you're able to get a fruit 12 months of the year when it's a seasonal fruit, you've got to ask what's happened to that fruit to make it available out of season.
Yeah.
And again, we're feeding our stomachs, but not our cells.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. So that was number one, toxins. Number two was cells, and the cells need food. In a way, we've covered that from what you said.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, sometimes it's tough to get off processed junk food.
Yeah.
In fact, it's difficult.
And I would say it is difficult, which is why supplementation is now essential. Just because, again, we have to accept the environment we've created. So if we're looking at the top 3 or 4 supplements, I would say vitamin D hormone. And by the way, vitamin D is not a vitamin, it's a hormone. The difference is you can make hormones, you can't make vitamins, and you can make vitamin D. A lot of studies pre and post COVID have shown how powerful it is across literally every organ. And it's an immune regulator. So vitamin D, also cellular food and immune food are things like zinc and copper, magnesium, vitamin C. If we can supplement along those lines, that would be very good.
Well, these things are readily available and they're cheap.
They are.
Actually.
Yes.
A lot cheaper than a double pizza helping.
And remember, if we remove the furnace in our body, I call it inflammation, these micronutrients will not be depleted in the wrong way.
Yes.
So by reducing inflammation, you're enabling more of these nutrients to be there for your well-being.
So it's having a double effect.
Absolutely.
You're minimizing the damage that's done from inflammation, and you're removing the kill effect it has on some of the other things, which, if they're left alone to flourish, will do you more good.
Yes. And thirdly, the gut itself should be allowed to repair from time to time. So there are certain foods, processed foods particularly, that create inflammation. And I would say, whilst an aggressive fast isn't necessary, it may be possible to do an 18-hour fast from time to time. That involves one sleep cycle and 6 hours. But you'll be surprised what a difference something like that could make, where you just drink water for those 18 hours. It allows the gut to heal. It allows this autophagy process to kick in as well, and it removes the glycogen at a faster rate.
And the autophagy process was
the fasting.
The fasting.
Yeah, but
and is that the one that's dealing with the scrap?
Correct.
Cells.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we do more aggressive fasting, but an 18-hour fast is doable in most cases.
Yeah, and that's not too difficult actually.
No.
You miss your breakfast. Eat early the day before, miss your breakfast. You've done it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Number 3 was the mitochondria, the cell, the battery, the energy. What can we do with natural means to support the sustenance of the energy or the building of the energy?
So, first of all, we need to direct this energy correctly to well-being and not fighting off inflammation. So again, going back to the original thing, detox, reduce the load on the mitochondria. That's one way of getting the energy up, reduce the load on it. The second thing is we know things like NMN are very good, nicotinamide mononucleotide, which is a supplement. We know things like resveratrol, very good. Anti-inflammatory agents like turmeric and curcumin indirectly help support the mitochondria.
I put fresh turmeric in my sort of made up drink in the morning.
Yes.
And what I do, I actually just I buy fresh turmeric from the supermarket, chop it up in slices, stick it in a bag in the freezer.
Absolutely.
And then just take out a bit in the morning.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
The other thing that we don't pay too much attention to, but we should, is B12. B12 is involved in the process of making this energy called ATP from the mitochondria. And we sometimes deplete our B12 levels because our gut doesn't absorb it, or we're not taking enough of it because food is no longer nutrition. So supplementing with B12 will support energy levels. And a lot of our patients who take regular B12 supplements find that they are calmer, they have more energy. So again, it's about feeding the cell and the mitochondria correctly. And your predecessors would have got this from nature in the past. Yes. Sadly, we can't, so we have to mitigate against those risks.
Okay. That's brilliant. Number 4 was the immune system. And we spoke about inflammation, which we've not dealt with it, but we've covered it. Gut health, imbalance, leaky gut.
Yes.
What can we do? I mean, I think in the last couple of years, there's been a massive acceleration in information about the gut.
Absolutely.
And how core it is to our well-being.
Yes.
Something I mean, I never even thought about 5 years ago.
No. And
so
yes, and I think the key thing here is to not overcomplicate it. So the gut it's an organ, and we're very good at looking at the organ through CTs and colonoscopies, but it has a function. It effectively is your first line of defense, so it allows certain things in and other things not in. And effectively, everything we eat passes through that gut. So if we eat badly or eat things that are inflammatory, the gut's going to protest. It's going to get swollen, and if it's swollen, it's not going to absorb correctly. But also, there's hundreds of millions of bacteria that live there as an ecosystem. And if we feed some of them and not others, we can get overgrowth. And that overgrowth can then lead to poor gut health and therefore poor gut function. Thirdly, by reducing the immune response of the gut through inflammation, other bugs can grow in there, parasites, bacteria that shouldn't be there. So this is not just about the ecosystem being overgrown, it's about other bugs that shouldn't be there. And these are stealth infections. They're slow. They won't cause you to be overly ill, but you'll feel fatigue, you may feel bloated, you'll get gut pains. And when we go to the specialists and they can do all the fancy tests to exclude sinister pathology, colitis, cancer, you're kind of left with a dustbin diagnosis of IBS. Now we know that when we do functional gut testing, we can see that there's imbalance, no harmony. So we try and do everything we can to get that harmony back. We also know that antibiotics are overprescribed, and this can sort of cause problems in the gut. And so what we tend to say is, if you can get the functional gut testing done to see where you are, great. If you can't, then focus on a decent pre, pro, and postbiotic that can regulate the bacteria. And remember, stress, trauma, injury, lack of sleep produce inflammation that directly impact on gut health.
Okay, so the food side of that we've touched on, not covered in detail, but we've touched on it. Stress, so presumably if we find ways of dealing with stressful moments better, I don't know, I was going to say not reacting, that may actually make things worse in a way, but if we can find ways to deal with stress,
yes,
which we all face in this world. I mean, it's an angry world we live in as well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things around that can make you, then presumably that will have an immediate knock-on effect.
absolutely.
So stress management, what they call it.
Yes.
Probably not a very good word for it,
Yeah.
actually, given what we've said, but that will affect a whole series of things, including the way your gut operates.
100%. And remember, our predecessors had stress. The whole point of life is stress. The ability to overcome challenges of food, water, hunger, etc. has always existed. But what we're doing now is overloading. We're putting more and more on our plates, and therefore the body's having to react quicker and harder. And with that, we're depleting. So our resilience drops. So therefore, all the problems become more amplified. Our ability to, as you said, respond changes to a reactive body, and therefore that agitation it's a vicious circle. We have stress, it leads to lower bandwidth, the lower bandwidth leads to more stress, so that cycle needs to be addressed. And I think we just need to be aware of the impact of what we do, reflect on it, and put in measures to try and mitigate against that risk.
Yeah, brilliant. There's lots of questions I've got, which we'll save for another time. There's one concern I've got, which is a huge number of well-intentioned medical professionals, including you, who think deeply about this and dearly want to give us a better service as human beings. My question is, we have a massive, very powerful pharmacological industry, which I would have to question where they sit in this process, because it seems to me, I mean, if we're well, if we're healthy, there are no drugs. It's over. You only need drugs when you're sick. So what are they doing? What is their intention with all the stuff you've described? Some of which could be quite a threat for them. What is their response? And what are they trying to do for us? What is their plan for us humans?
Yeah. So we now know through hospital admissions, through surveys, research, that we are overprescribing medication. And the impact of that overprescribing sometimes leads to adverse reactions, adverse side effects, increased hospitalization. I think as a profession, we need to think, do we necessarily have to prescribe this drug? Does the patient have other things that can be put into place, or can we support them to understanding why they're getting what the problem or the signal of the disease, and talk about some of the things that we're talking about? Now, we as a medical profession always say, think before you prescribe about alternatives. But in a 10-minute consultation, it's impossible to dissect this in a way that patients can go home and accept it and do something about it. So I think from my point of view, certainly from my experience of the work we've done, is it is inevitably led to reduced prescribing, stopping drugs, or reducing them significantly. What is also important is that we've now empowered the individual to understand their symptoms and do something about it through their own mechanisms of control. And surely that's a good thing, not a bad thing. At a time when hospitals are inundated, GP practices are inundated, my concern is that the data recently is showing that new prescriptions for the same primary indication haven't actually achieved any further benefit. So we're getting more and more sophisticated with the drugs, but we're not actually changing very much. And that is a concern, because when a drug will go through the system, bumbling through, hitting receptors that it may not need to hit, and cause other problems. So surely the starting point should be, what can we achieve for the individual? Now, I'm not saying drugs don't have a role. When someone is sick, they do have a role, but we're not very good at stopping that drug. So it may have been needed in the initial problem, but once that problem has evolved and other mechanisms have been put in place, surely the idea is to reduce that pharmacological intervention and put in more what I call integrative, holistic means of functioning, but all the things we're talking about. So I think the problem I have is that we often see people start a drug and then stay on it, and then another drug is introduced to counteract the side effect of that. And in my work in the cottage hospital, I've seen people on 15, 20 drugs. And the one intervention we put into place that gets them better is stop half of them. Work on movement, work on nutrition. So we as a profession probably need to be more involved in explaining the root cause analysis than jumping straight into the pharmacological world. The issue I have is that the time isn't there. The influence is strong, and with the population screening we're doing now, it's leading to increasing prescribing.
Right. So the conference where one part of the industry was suggesting that they start statins at the age of 16 for life. And I'm not a conspiracist, but it leads me to sort of fear that continual medicating is a sort of a goal, because it's definitely going to cure or stop. Is that something we should be concerned about?
I think we should be mindful. There's been, since people have been talking about this, there's been other publications. One of interest is that over 60-year-olds with raised cholesterols have less heart disease than lower cholesterols. And why, you would ask, why would that be the case when all the evidence is suggesting the contrary? Well, where do you think hormones come from? Your hormones are made from cholesterol. And if we are if this data is correct, and certainly the publications suggest that it might be, then surely the inflammation caused by reducing hormones may be more of a factor than dropping cholesterol. So if we're going to start statins very early in life, what are we doing to the other profiles of that individual? There's also been some studies to suggest that taking statins increases risk of diabetes. So there's all these compounding factors in the background. And I think before we rush into this, we need to take an integrated, holistic approach to the individual. And for me, the data that originally brought statins into play was done on young people. And they found that raised lipids led to more heart disease. But in fact, was it the stress and the inflammation around that individual's life that was more of a factor than the cholesterol? It wasn't done on the older population. So again, what is driving this, we have to be mindful of. And commercial interest is something we also need to be very mindful of.
So statins from the age of 16 for the rest of our lives may not be a great thing.
I would say at the moment, looking at what else is going on in that individual's life, we should probably be spending more emphasis on that rather than putting in the last on one element.
Yeah, great. Well, okay, so here's my final question, which is, I hope I've been fairly diligently following the advice from you over the last 5 years, Ash. So given that, how long do you think I've got?
Yeah. Well, I mean, judging by what's going on in recent research, if we could continue to feed your cell effectively, and now through peptides feed the DNA properly, data suggests that you will be living till 120.
You could be my best friend.
And living well. Or dying younger later.
Yes, definitely. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And if you want to hear more, please do follow us. Hit the bell icon so you're notified of other podcasts when they come out. And subscribe to our channel. And I look forward to welcoming you.